course on Project 2019 Advanced. My name's Deborah and I'm your instructor on this course, and I'm a Microsoft Office specialist and TAP certified IT trainer with a specialism in Microsoft products, and I've been using Microsoft Project for a long time along with the rest of the wider Microsoft Office suite. And in fact, I'd say it's probably getting on for about 20 years now that I've been using this product, and I've used many different versions of Microsoft Project over that time. I've used Microsoft Project to manage projects from large to small, from a value of a few £1,000s or dollars to euros or multi-billion pound projects and programs for both government organisations and public sector organisations. So over time, I found out quite a bit about the use of Microsoft Project, and I'm hoping to impart a lot of knowledge to you during this course. In this introductory section, I want to cover some very important points before we get started. So please bear with me for a few minutes while I talk about, first of all, assumptions I'm making on this course. Now, you may well have used an earlier version of Microsoft Project, and maybe you're wondering whether a good solid knowledge in that earlier version is good enough. Now, if your knowledge is in Project 2016 or 2013 and even 2010, and particularly if you've got a good sound practical experience of applying that knowledge, you'll probably find that it's good enough, because in my fundamental topics, Microsoft Project 2010, 2013 and 2016 and 2019 are pretty equivalent really. There have been some changes, but they have been confined to specific areas, and you can probably pick up what you need in terms of those changes as we go along. For example, one of the largest areas of change has been in reporting, and I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on this advanced course talking about reporting. So hopefully with a little bit of help, maybe from our basic course, you should be able to fill in any gaps in your knowledge. The next question is that every time you look at Microsoft Project on Microsoft.com, there seem to be more project-related pieces of software. Which piece of software is this course about? Well, let's jump into products and pricing. You'll see here when you go onto the project page, you have two tabs, cloud-based solutions and on-premise solutions. So if you are an Office 365 subscriber, you would in general go for the cloud-based solution. Now, this course that we're doing is Project 2019, which is an on-premise solution or a one-time purchase solution. So these are the three pieces of software that are available to you: Project Standard, Project Professional and Project Server. And you can see underneath there all of the features of each of those, so that will help you make the selection as to which piece of software you want to buy. The next thing I want to point out is that throughout this course I'm going to be using keyboard and mouse, so mouse mode rather than touch mode. Now, if you are going through this course on a tablet device and you want to turn on touch mode, that's absolutely fine. Personally, I find Microsoft Project a bit awkward to maneuver around using touch mode, so I prefer to use the keyboard and mouse. But remember, if you do want to turn on touch mode, you can click the drop down here and you can select touch from that drop down. And when I click it, what it will do is you'll just see that these icons get spaced a little further apart, which will allow for your finger when you're using a touch device. But as I said, I'm going to stick with keyboard and mouse throughout the duration of this course. The final point I'd like to make is that although I'm based in the UK, throughout this course my default locale will be US and my default currency will be the US dollar. Also, I will be providing some course files, and I'm also setting some exercises, and the majority of those will be based on, for example, US currency. So if you want to stick with US, that's fine as well. So that's it in this section. In the next section, I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure of the course and the material that is supplied with the course. And then after that, we'll be able to get started with Project 2019 Advanced. That's the end of this section. Please join me in the next one. Hello again, and welcome back to our course on Project 2019 Advanced. In this and the next few sections, we're going to look at a couple of related topics in Project 2019. And we're going to look at these two topics together because you very often need to use them, perhaps for the first time, on one large program of work or one very large project. Now, what quite often happens when you're working on a large project is that the project gets larger and larger, and maybe becomes a set of projects, or perhaps you're working on a program that needs to be split up into a set of projects. And not only do you need to split the work up, but different people are going to manage different parts of that body of work. And what often happens is that the different projects, although they need to be managed separately, they still share resources. So what we're going to look at in the next few sections are combining multiple projects into one, or if you like, splitting a large project into several projects, and sharing resources between projects. So it's essentially project consolidation and resource sharing that we're covering here. Now, in order to demonstrate these two techniques, I'm going to use an example of a charity event. And the idea is that we're going to run a charity event, and it's going to comprise actually 3 events within one. There'll be a gala dinner, there'll be a fashion show and a buffet lunch, and there will be a sports day and a barbecue. So the gala dinner will be a fundraising dinner where we'll charge the participants a pretty heavy admission price, but for that they'll get a good dinner, there'll probably be some kind of prize draw, some entertainment and so on. And then the fashion show and the buffet lunch will invite local fashion houses to put on a show. And as part of that, we'll provide them with a good buffet lunch. And again, we'll charge a suitable admission charge for all the people that want to see the fashion show and enjoy the buffet lunch. And we're also going to run a sports day, pretty much a family-focused event, and that will include a barbecue. So as far as this stage in the course is concerned, we're going to assume that I've done some of the early planning. So I've put in place a provisional schedule for the major aspects of the event. And in the Gantt chart here, let me just expand that planning section. You can see that I've got maybe 20 tasks in that planning section. And I'm assuming that at this point we realise that this really is going to be quite a big undertaking, and we need to split the charity event into separate parts. And we've kind of now got to the point that we realise we're going to need people to manage each aspect of the event. So we're going to have one person managing the overall plan. We're going to have another person managing the gala dinner, another person managing the fashion show and buffet lunch, and then finally a sports day project manager. Now the key point here is that although the individual projects are not really very complicated at this stage, maybe about a dozen or so tasks in each, we need each of the project managers to be able to manage their project independently and separately. So why do we need to be able to do this? Well, as you'll know from your current knowledge of Microsoft Project, when you're dealing with editing a single MPP file, if our 4 project managers each want to work on it at the same time, that becomes very, very complicated, particularly if they all want to work on it at home and they don't have some kind of shared access to the file. So what the project managers need to be able to do here is to manage each of their projects separately. Now that in itself is a pretty straightforward thing to do. But the problem then is, how do we share the resources? Some of the people, for instance, the group of volunteers that we're going to take on to do a lot of the work here, or people dealing with, for example, publicity, or people dealing with the legal side, getting licenses and so on. There are many people involved in an event like this who will be shared between the 4 projects. So how do we make sure that those people are not over-allocated? And the way that we do this is to set up our 4 separate projects so that they share resources. Now the added complication here, and again this is quite typical, is that the 4 projects, although we want to separate them out, they are not independent. These projects have various links between them, and we need to make sure that these links are set up correctly, understood and respected by all of the projects. Now let me point out a couple of things before we start. First of all, if you're going to split a program of work into a number of separate projects, it's a good idea to make that decision as early on as possible, because if you've already set the program up as a single MPP file, there will be quite a bit of work to do in splitting it up again. I'm going to show you 1 or 2 options for splitting as we go through the next few sections. And as you'll see, there's very often quite a bit of work to do. Usually a very good proportion of that work relates to the relationships between the tasks, so in this case the initial program before we split it up, and maintaining those links when we split the program of work up. At the moment, with my 4 summary tasks, I've only got the 4th one open, Sports Day and Barbecue. And although you can see the links within that task because the other 3 summary tasks are currently collapsed, you can't see links to tasks within those from Sports Day and Barbecue. But if, for instance, I were to expand the planning summary tasks, look carefully at Sports Day and Barbecue tasks now. Now you can see that there are in fact several links to the planning summary task. When one of the summary tasks is collapsed, you don't see those links. They're still there, but you can't see them. Now, before I get started on splitting this program of work into 4 separate projects, what I'm going to do is take a quick look at the resource sheet. Now, I've got here 8 resources at the moment, although note the last one, volunteer, we're counting on getting 10 or possibly even more volunteers to help on this charity event. I've left the standard rates at 0. And for the purposes of this first few sections of the course, I'm really going to ignore cost. We're going to come to cost in relation to other projects a little bit later on. And what I'm going to do is first separate Sports Day and Barbecue to make it a separate project. Now I'm going to set up Sports Day and Barbecue in a separate project in a particular way. And this way is not necessarily the best way of doing this. The best way will always depend on the particular circumstances that you're in, but some of the tools and techniques that you'll see here will be useful to you. As we go through the next few sections, hopefully you'll see some improvements that you can make to the way that you do this. But as I said earlier on in the section, one of the key things here is that the earlier in the process you can do this, the better. The more likely you are to save yourself time and effort if you split up a program as early as possible. So let's get started. Let's first of all create an empty blank project using the keyboard shortcut Control-N. Now let me switch back to my original project. And what I'm going to do is expand out Sports Day and Barbecue. And I'm going to select all of those tasks. I'm going to copy them to the clipboard. And then I'm going to switch back to my empty project and I'm going to paste those tasks into that project. Now, having pasted those in, note that within what was a summary task in the original project, the dependencies still exist. Now, what I'm going to do is to save this particular project as a separate MPP file. So I've saved in the project course files folder and I've called it charity event sportsday.mpp. Now there are a couple of important points to make here. One of them is that when I copied the block of tasks, I copied the summary tasks, Sports Day and Barbecue itself as well. And I want to return to that point a little bit later on. But in addition, if I look at the resource sheet for my newly created project, you may be surprised to see that there are only 2 resources on it. We have volunteer, and note that the max number is 1, and we have Sports Day PM. So our new project has a sort of resource sheet created for it, but it doesn't get the same resource sheet as the total project that we started with. And what happens when you do what we've done is that Project 2019 creates a resource sheet based on the resources that are already specified in the copied and pasted tasks. And so you can see, for example, here, one consequence of that is that the volunteer resource already seems to be over allocated because when it creates the resource sheet, it defaults to creating a max of 1 resource. And if we looked at the resources already allocated in the original project, we would see that within the Sports Day and Barbecue summary task, we already have more than 1 volunteer assigned to tasks. Now, in fact, there's an even bigger problem here with the resource because although I now have 2 projects and they each have, for instance, a Sports Day PM resource, these Sports Day PM resources are completely different resources. Each of the projects is using its own resources. And even though each of them has a resource called Sports Day PM, obviously that resource name is the same on both resource sheets. So as far as Project 2019 is concerned, those are completely different resources. Those two resources are essentially unrelated to each other because these two projects do not share resources. So before we go any further with splitting our program of work into 4 separate projects, what I really want to do is show you how to share resources. And that's exactly what we're going to cover in the next section. So I will see you then. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019 Advanced. In the previous section, I discussed some of the key points around project consolidation, the reasons that you might want to split projects up, and the reasons why you might want to join projects together. And one of the key aspects that comes out of that is the importance of deciding how to deal with resources. And in relation to our charity event, we came across the first key issue, which is if we start to split the event into separate projects, we somehow need to make sure that those projects are using the same resources. And so what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you how to set up a resource pool and also show you how to share the resource pool between a number of projects. So my starting point for this section is the ending point for the preceding section. So I still have my complete list of tasks here in my charity event file. And I also have open at the moment the individual Sports Day project that I created in the preceding section. Now it's worth noting that the tasks involved in the Sports Day project are also still in this all charity event project, the main project. So it's clear that at some stage I'm probably going to need to remove those as they're now in separate projects. But I'm going to set up the resource pool first. Now, one of the key aspects of a resource pool is that generally speaking, we set it up as a project with resources, but with no tasks. And quite often you'll want to set up the resource pool right at the beginning of the project so that you can then share that resource pool. So on many occasions, you'll start off with a completely empty MPP file. You'll go to the resource sheet and you'll start entering in your resources, which will make up your resource pool. You'll then save your project, but with no tasks. Now on this occasion, we already have a really great starting point for our resource pool. Because if I look at the resource sheet, I've already got all of my resources. And I'm going to basically save a copy of this project. I'm going to remove all of the tasks, and then that will become my resource pool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on File. I'm going to go down to Save As. And then I'm going to browse to my normal course files folder. And my save project is going to be called charity_event_resources.mpp. Now, having saved charity event resources, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the tasks and I'm going to press the delete key. So I now have a project with no tasks. But if I click across to the resource sheet, of course I still have all of my resources, and this is now my resource pool. Now let me switch back to the individual project, the Sports Day project. And what I'm going to do here is to specify that this project uses that resource pool. So if I go to the Resource tab, and in the Assignments group, there is a Resource Pool button. So I'm going to click the drop down, and I'm going to select Share Resources. Now from here I'm given a choice. It's asking me, do I want to use my own resources? And essentially that's what I'm doing at the moment. Or do I want to use a resource from at least one open resource pool? So it is worth noting that when you want to use a resource pool that's already been set up, you do need to have that resource pool open. So let's click Use Resources, and I'm going to select the drop down, and I currently only have one other File Open, which is the charity event resources, and that happens to be where my resource pool is located. So I'm going to select that. Now, the meaning of the lower pair of radio buttons will become more apparent a little bit later on. But let's just quickly look at it briefly now. So it says here, on conflict with calendar or resource information, the pool takes precedence or the sharer takes precedence. Now, what can happen sometimes is that when you're looking at resource information for shared resources, there may be a conflict between the resource pool and any calendars applying to resources in the resource pool. And, for example, a calendar in the sharing project, the sharer project. What you need to do is to specify here which takes precedence, the pool or the sharer. Now I'm going to leave this set at the pool, which is the default value at the moment, and I'm going to click on OK. Now, when I did that, I don't know if you saw, but if you were looking carefully at task ID 10, we did have an over allocation there. And you'll see that now that I've set up those shared resources, it's disappeared. So I no longer have an over allocation on task 10. So let's jump across to the resource sheet. And you'll see that I'm now using that resource pool. And because I am, you can see that there are now 10 volunteers available, which is why that over allocation has been removed. So what I have now open is a resource pool and an individual sports day project that uses that resource pool. So the other thing that I need to do is to get the main project file, the charity event project file, to use the resource pool. So let me open it again. So this file is of course still using its own resources. So I'm going to click on Resource. I'm going to go to the Assignments group and click on the Resource pool and select Share Resources. I'm going to say Use Resources, and we only have one option again. I want it to share the resources from the Charity Event Resources file. And we're going to say that the pool takes precedence and click on OK. So now essentially what I have are two projects sharing the same resources. Now one of the next things that I need to do is separate fully the charity event project into 4 separate projects. And each of those needs to share our resource pool. And I'm going to make a start on that in the next section. Before I do, I want to talk a little more about resource sharing and 1 or 2 aspects of resource sharing that are important to be aware of. Now, in order to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go across to the resource sheet. And there, of course, is our resource pool. Now, you'll notice that we do have an over allocation here on the Sports Day PM. And the reason we have over allocated resources now is, of course, that I still have the Sports Day activities in the main project file. And I'm going to sort that out in the next section. But what I want to do is change the view here from resource sheet to resource usage. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new column. So let me just drag that along. I'm going to select new column, and what I'm looking for in here is project. And remember, everything is in alphabetical order, which makes it a little bit easier to find. I'm going to select project from the list, and I'm just going to drag this column next to work so it's a bit easier to see, and let's just make it a bit wider as well. And what you can see now is a very important aspect of a resource pool, because the resource pool knows where the resources are being used. And as you can see, it's got a list of the unassigned tasks, or that's tasks which haven't been assigned resources. But where we have specific resources, let's go down. And you can see there we have the over allocated resource, the Sports Day PM. And you can see it's over allocated because it has resources in the Charity Event Sports Day project and also the Charity Event Overall project. Now, some of these, as we know, are duplicates because we copied those resources across, but some of them aren't. And as I said, we'll be dealing with that in the next section. But when you're dealing with shared resource pool and consolidated projects, it can be very useful to include the project column in the table or tables that you're using while you're working on those projects, because it very often just clarifies which project a resource is being used in. And that's very often a good clue to resolving over allocations when you're dealing with multiple projects and possibly multiple project managers. So in the next section, we're going to turn our attention to splitting up the charity event into its constituent projects. So please join me for that. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019 Advanced. In this section, we're going to set up a master project for the charity event, and we're going to start with our original project. That's the one called Charity Event, and also the Sports Day project that we've already created. Remember that those two projects are now both sharing a resource pool called Charity Event _ resources. And really, when it comes to splitting a large project or program into a number of constituent projects or sub-projects, the key area where there is usually the most effort is in restoring any links that existed in the original project or program. And this goes right back to a point that I made a couple of times already on this course. It's a good idea to decide whether you're going to split a program or project into a number of separate files as early on in the process as you can, or you do finish up with quite a bit of work to do at the end. Now what I'm going to do here is to demonstrate how to deal with that one project, and then what I'm going to do is to set you exercise 1, where you're going to split off the other projects that make up all of the charity event. Now the first thing I'm going to do is open up the charity event project file. Now look carefully at what happens when I do this. Now it says this file shares resources from a resource pool. What do you want to do? You can open the resource pool to see the assignments across all share of files, or do not open other files. Now if I open this project on its own, although I'll be able to see the list of resources that it uses, I won't be looking at the resource pool and all of the sharer projects. So I won't get an accurate picture of resource usage. So what I'm going to do here is to select the first option. Now it's very interesting. If you go to the View tab here and look at the switch windows, what you'll see here is that we have the charity event open, and we have the charity event resources in read only, but we don't have the Sports Day project open. Now let me just jump into resource usage, and let's just drag that across a little bit. Now you'll see here that although I don't have the Sports Day project open, the resource pool is aware of the resource assignments in the project, and I can see them here on the resource sheet in resource usage view. So if I just drag this out a little bit so you can see the full details, and you can see the full path there for the Sports Day file, as well as the other files listed below. So that's a very important point. I can see how the resources are being used even though I don't have all of the projects open. I do, however, need to have the resource pool open. So having pointed that out, let me go back to the Gantt chart for the All project, and let's expand the planning summary task. And you'll note that the gala dinner and fashion show and buffet lunch summary tasks are both collapsed, and the Sports Day and barbecue summary tasks are still expanded. Now, as you can see from this, there are links and dependencies between the Sports Day and barbecue summary tasks and the planning summary tasks. And what I need to do is to replace the Sports Day summary task with my separate project and then re-establish these links. Now, I need to explain a couple of things as we go through this, but the first thing I need to do is to insert the Sports Day project into the charity event project. So I'm going to select an empty row. I'm going to go to the Project tab. And on the left, I have an Insert group with a Subproject button. So let's click on that. And I'm going to browse to the Course Files folder and select Sports Day and then click on Insert. Now you can immediately see that this is an inserted subproject because you can see the icon there in the first column. But note that, as usual, when you insert something into a table, it assumes the indentation of the task above. So this particular project, although we've inserted it as a separate project, is currently within the Sports Day and Barbecue Summary Task 46. So one of the first things I need to do, if I go to the Task tab, is to outdent it so that it isn't part of that summary task. Now let me expand the subproject and return to a point that I made earlier on in the course. When I selected the task to make this, I selected the summary tasks Sports Day and Barbecue, and that has been included within the sub-project. It may well be that when you do this, you also want to do that, but it may well be that you don't actually select the summary task when you create a sub-project in the way that I did earlier. Now, if I hadn't have selected the summary task when I did that copy, then I would have only had the tasks here, so from 2 down to 11. And in fact, I could lose the Sports Day and Barbecue summary task within the subproject now if I wanted to. So let's select task 2 down to 11. And if I outdent them all, and then get rid of this one, I've still got everything I need within my sub-project. So now I've got everything within it that I need, but of course the scheduling is very wrong. And the reason it's very wrong is that I don't have the correct dependencies. Within the sub-project, I have internal dependencies, but I don't have the dependencies relating to the planning summary task in this file. The other thing to notice here is if you look at the charity event project up here, the ID numbers, they go right down to 56, and in fact, task 58 is the inserted sub-project. But within the inserted sub-project, it has its own ID numbering. So you have tasks 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So when you look at the dependencies within the sub-project, for instance, the dependency here, task 2, obtain insurance, its predecessor is task 1, perform risk assessment. Whereas in the charity event project, task 48, obtain insurance, its predecessor is task 47, perform risk assessment. So although we need to establish all of the correct dependencies, bear in mind that the numbering system within the sub-project is a little bit different. Having said that, all of those internal dependencies are there, so that's fine. So it's only the dependencies to the charity event project that I need to establish. Now, the great thing about leaving the original Sports Day and Barbecue summary task in there for the moment is that I can use the dependencies there in order to build dependencies to the sub-project. So for instance, let's start at the beginning with task 47, perform risk assessment. This has a predecessor of task number 10. If I go up to task number 10, I can see that it's actually book venue. So I've selected book venue. Now I'm going to go down to my sub-project And I'm going to select Perform Risk Assessment. And I'm going to create a link. And now I can see that some of the tasks in my subproject are correctly scheduled. But interestingly, if I look at the predecessor is expressed in a different way to the other predecessors in the project. You can see that if we're dealing with dependencies between projects, we have the project path, and let me just widen this out a little bit so you can see. The project file name and the task ID within the project as part of the dependency. And let's just drag that back in to save us some space. Now I can go up and follow exactly the same principle now. For example, if I go to the next task down, so prepare draft sports day program of events, that relates to task 4, which if I scroll up is meeting 1. So I can select them both and click on the link, and that task is also now scheduled correctly. Now there are a couple more of those to do, so I'll do them and you can join me again in a moment. So basically now I have specified, hopefully correctly, all of the predecessors for the tasks within the sub-project. But as you'll see from the Gantt chart, the bars and lines, there's also some dependencies in the other direction. So for instance, if we look at the final task in the sports day summary task up here, so task 61, it has at least, if we drag this across, one successor. In this case, task 13. So I also need to make sure that any successors are set up correctly as well. So what is task 13? Let's scroll up and take a look. So I can see that it's vacate venue. So I need to set up that as successor to task 13 in the sub-project. So I essentially need to do this the opposite way round. So I'm going to select sports day and barbecue first. Then I'm going to scroll all the way up to that successor task, which was task 13, vacate venue, and select that as well, and click on link. And if I scroll down, I now see that I have a link in the successors column. So having made sure that I've set up all of my predecessors and successors correctly, the next thing that I'm going to do is to delete the sports day and barbecue summary task, as it's now completely replaced by the sub-project. So I'm going to scroll up, I'm going to select it, and I'm going to hit delete. And you'll notice here that if I click on continue, it will delete sports day and barbecue and all of the subtasks. So let's click on OK. And that's now been deleted and has in effect been replaced by the sub-project. Now, one of the things that you've probably noticed by now, particularly if you look at the IDs within the sports day sub-project, is that the numbering has got gaps. So you can see here it goes 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, so on and so forth. You may also have noticed, as we've been going through doing the work in this section, that the numbering of tasks in the main project also has gaps. So you can see here it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then jumps to 6, so on and so forth. Now, don't worry about the gaps because I'm going to talk about those a little bit later on in the course. For the moment, I've replaced the summary task by the sub-project, and the scheduling of sports day is correct at the moment. So the last thing I'm going to do in this section is to close down Microsoft Project. So I'm going to click on the cross in the top corner, and it says, do you want to save your changes to all? So I can do yes to all or no to all. So I'm going to say, yes, I do. And again, do you want to save your changes to the sports day file? Yes. And then I get a message saying, do I want to update the resource pool to reflect the changes for all the OpenSharer projects? It's important that you read this particular message carefully because it explains what to do in a situation where you only want to save some of the changes in the Sharer projects. But for the moment, we're going to save everything. So I'm just going to click on OK. So that's the end of this section. I will see you in the next one. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019 Advanced. Having looked at some of the basic aspects of resource sharing and consolidation, what I'd like to look at in this section are some of the more practical aspects of how this can all be made to work. Now, before I proceed, I'd like to give you a small word of warning. In my experience, consolidation and resource sharing in Microsoft Project works fine if you follow a very clearly defined set of rules, if you like, protocols. And in order for this to be the case, your requirements really must be pretty straightforward. And the situation you're trying to achieve will probably be pretty similar to the situation I'm going to describe in this section. If in fact your requirements are more complex, so for instance, if you have a number of pools or resources, and sometimes you need to get resources from one place and sometimes from another, maybe lots of different projects and programs and consolidations and so on, then Microsoft Project isn't really going to cope with it without you being extremely careful. And even then, you'd be working in an environment where a relatively small slip or deviation from the rules might cause a problem. If your requirements are even a little bit more complicated, then you really need to go for Microsoft Project Server, where you can use what's called ERP or Enterprise Resource Planning. And the ability to deal with shared resources or resources from multiple sources is supported in a much more comprehensive, flexible and resilient way. So that's just a word of warning. If you're looking at this section and thinking, well, my situation is a lot more complex than that, then you really need to consider whether project itself is going to be up to the job. Now, the second word of warning is very closely associated with the first one. If you have a situation such as the one I'm going to describe in this section, where you have, say, 4 project managers sharing a consolidated project and a resource pool, it's very important that they all know what they're doing, because even if one of them doesn't understand how to do this, one person can cause chaos for everybody else. So not only is it important that they all know what they're doing, but it's probably worth making sure that you have some sort of written rules and protocols to cover the situation. Now, having said that, let's take a look at what I consider to be a fairly typical situation. And I've taken the charity event, the 6 MPP files. There's the All Master Project, the Resources Resource Pool, and the 4 individual projects. And I've saved them into a cloud location. So that's a shared location where other people can access those files. And in this case, I have my files saved to Microsoft OneDrive. In your particular organization, you may have a network storage area that you might want to save the files to, but in this case, I'm going to be using cloud storage. So let's start with the situation where I know that the project is there and all I want to do is take a look at the whole thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open Charity Event All and let's just see what happens. Well, first of all, Project 2019 realizes that Charity Event All uses a resource pool and we're given 2 choices. We can either open the resource pool to see the assignments across all share of files, that is, the files that share the resource pool, or we can say do not open the other files. Now, the reason we might choose the second option would be, for example, if we weren't really interested in resource usage at that stage and only perhaps wanted to look at some projects, maybe some schedule dates and times, maybe to just run off a report related to tasks with no particular interest in the current state of resourcing. Well, in that case, the second option would be fine because we'd see all of the tasks, but we wouldn't be able to get information about resource assignments and resource usage. On the other hand, if you do want to look at resource usage and assignments and possibly even make some changes to these, then it's necessary to choose the first option. So on this occasion, I'm going to choose the first option. So now I have access to charity event all, and within this file I have the 4 constituent subprojects that are included within the master project. Now, one very important aspect of this is that all 5 projects, that is the master and the 4 subprojects and the resource pool, are all in the same location. So that's the situation in which I can do this. So let's take that as an ideal situation. I'm working in a shared office, looking at these projects in a shared location. Now, supposing that I was the gala dinner project manager, and any particular time I only needed to see the gala dinner project. So let me close this file. And now I'm going to open the gala dinner project from the same shared location. Now, once again, I get the message about opening the resource pool to see assignments across all sharer files, or of not opening the other files. Note that I also have in the file behind what is in effect dummy or ghost tasks, and these are temporary dummy versions of the tasks to which the tasks in the gala dinner project have dependencies, either predecessors or successors. Now, they're not real tasks, but they represent tasks in other sub-projects of all, and they are just to give me information about what are to this project external dependencies. Now, on this occasion, I'm going to say open the resource pool to see the assignments across all sharer files, and I'm going to click OK. Now, there is my project. I can work on the gala dinner project if I want to. And if I go into the resource pool, I will see the actual shared resource pool, and I can use those resources in my project. Now, if in fact I wanted to change the view of the resources, say I wanted to go over to the resource usage view, I could see how those resources are used, or I should say where they're used. And in Resource Usage View, one thing I could do is insert a column to show project. So let's click, scroll down, and select project. And let's just widen that column out very slightly. And even though I only have the gala dinner project open, I can still see where the resources are used in relation to other projects. So it's really worth noting that even though I don't have all of those other projects open, the resource pool is aware of where the resources are being used. Now let's look at a very different situation. The Gala Dinner Project Manager has decided to work on the project at home, and from home he doesn't have access to the shared location. So would the Gala Dinner Project Manager take the resource pool home? Well, in theory that is possible, and provided everything were managed extremely carefully, it could even be made to work. But in my general experience, that is a bit of a recipe for disaster, because once the Gala Dinner Project Manager has made whatever changes they were to make, including potentially changes to the resource pool, if they bring the resource pool back to the shared location on the following day, and the other project managers have done the same, how do you manage to reconcile all of their changes with each other? Now, of course, you may be able to set things up so that they can still access the shared location from home, but I'm going to assume that on this occasion that's not possible. What is a much better idea is to let the person work on the project at home, but to understand the implications of any changes that are made and be able to incorporate those changes into the shared set of projects. So what we have here is the Gala Dinner project in a location where the resource pool, the shared resource pool, is not visible. So let's see what happens when we open the Gala Dinner project. Now, of course, Project 2019 knows that this project shares a resource pool and has actually tried to find that resource pool. So in this case, we don't say open resource pool to see assignments across all sharer files. We just say do not open other files. So it's worth noting that that doesn't mean that this project has fundamentally stopped sharing resources. It just means we're not going to look at them at the moment. And what you'll see here is that we get a warning about links that can't be made because this project is no longer in the shared location. So what I'm going to do at the moment is just close and go to the resource sheet and take a look at that. So on the resource sheet, you now have just 2 resources. And the 2 resources are the 2 specific resources that are used in the Gala Dinner project. So Gala Dinner Project Manager and Volunteer. And what happens in this situation is that Project 2019 creates a sort of temporary working resource sheet and only includes the resources that it knows about, which of course are the resources that are used in this project. It's unaware of the other resources because it can't see the shared resource pool. Now, as far as Project 2019 is concerned, these are at the moment local resources in a local resource sheet. So I could change assignments. So let's jump back to the Gantt chart. And let's look, for instance, at prepare dinner venue. And let's look at the resources. And let's change that from 3 units to say 2. And click OK. Now notice the warning just there. Check to see how the current assignments are adjusted to accommodate the change of units. So if I click to get my options, and I'm going to select the 3rd option, change the amount of work, but keep the duration the same. And that's now fine. And then the other thing we might want to say is, could I actually assign an additional resource here? So let's suppose that what I wanted to do was to assign the volunteer that I've just freed up to make bar arrangements. So let's do that. I'm going to double click. I'm going to select volunteer, 1 unit, and click on OK. And you can see I now have 1 volunteer assigned to task 8, make bar arrangements. But what about assigning a resource that we can't currently see? Supposing we're going to assign somebody to help with training the Gala Dinner volunteers. So let me go to the resource sheet. And I'm going to add a resource, and that resource is going to be caterer. And then I'm going to assign that person. So there are the changes that I'm going to make to the Gala Dinner project. So having finished work for the evening, I'm going to close this down and I'm going to bring it back to the shared location and replace the Gala Dinner project in the shared location. So let's see what the consequences of that are. So it's the next day and I've replaced the Gala Dinner project in the shared location and I've opened up the charity event project file. So let me scroll down to Gala Dinner and let's look at our changes. So first of all, prepare dinner venue. Let's double click. And I can see that I have 2 volunteers. And let's just check another one. So let's go into make bar arrangements. And I have 1 volunteer assigned to that. And if we look at the final change that we made, we'll double click on train Gala Dinner volunteers. And you can see that we have the caterer assigned to that task. And if you look now at the resource sheet, of course, now we're looking at the shared resource pool. And we have a 9th resource that's been added in there, caterer. So that was a local resource for the Gala Dinner project. And now it's been added into our shared resource pool. Now, there's absolutely no problem with this person now being added to our resource pool, but it's important to understand that if in fact the assignment we wanted to make was one of the existing resources, we may have to do a resource replacement. On this occasion, we didn't already have Caterer set up, but Caterer is now part of our resource pool. So you can see that all of those changes that we have made to the Gala Dinner project without the shared resource pool being available on this occasion have worked out absolutely fine. So that's it from this section. We're going to look at resource sharing and consolidating some more in the next one. So I'll see you then.